speakers. Yeah, so welcome to speakers, Stelios and Nang, to our second masterclass actually in this series held by DLT Science Foundation. And when we had the last session, we had a DeFi session plus the token velocity actually. But the feedback we got was that, we need to go a little bit deeper into tokenomics, but also they wanted to see more use cases, right? So that's what we bring to the audience today. So I'll hand over to Stylianos for the first session on tokenomics auditing. Over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Wei. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here with you today. I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to tokenomics, for those of you who are very new to the subject. And then I'll move on to tokenomics auditing, which is something I've been researching and I've been working on over the last couple of years or so. And I believe is one of the themes that is going to play a very important role in the very near future in the space of crypto and blockchain. So a few words about who I am. My primary background is in data science and AI. However, I was one of the very first people to take tokenomics seriously in 2017. And essentially what I did was I took some of the tools and methods I knew from the space of data science and machine learning and stochastic modeling and applied them to token economies. I'm a data science advisor at London Business School. I did my PhD in machine learning at UCL. And I've also written 3 books on AI and data science. If you want a copy, just feel free to shoot me over an email. I'm more than happy to share them with you. I'm the CEO of the Tesseract Academy, and this is my personal blog, thedatascientist.com. So a brief history of tokenomics. Let's start with how tokenomics came about. So tokenomics was essentially created via Ethereum. So Ethereum was launched in 2015, and it allowed the creation of tokens on its virtual computer. And this gave rise to an explosion of initial coin offerings in 2017. So essentially, it became very easy for anyone to create a token on top of Ethereum and program this token to have whatever utility, whatever properties they wish to impose on it. And this is what gave rise then to other innovations like DeFi, NFTs, the metaverse, and lots of other things that I'm sure we're going to see in the future. So tokenomics, essentially, it describes the study and development of token economies, right? So if we have to come with a definition, we should say that tokenomics is the study and management of the economics behind cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's probably important to make a distinction between tokens and cryptocurrencies. For a long time, cryptocurrencies were, let's say, the name of the game, and then with Ethereum and tokens, and then other layer ones, and now layer twos, and interoperability chains, and things like that. Tokens here essentially overtaken cryptocurrencies. It's more likely that someone starting a new project in this area, they will be creating a token on top of a layer one instead of creating their own cryptocurrency. Okay, so tokenomics essentially is the study of these types of economies on the blockchain. And as a discipline, I believe, calling it discipline, maybe it's a bit brave because it's so new, but I do wholeheartedly believe that it is a separate discipline. It has started to resemble a discipline very much so. It encompasses a wide range of factors related to the creation, distribution, and use of tokens within blockchain ecosystems and decentralized networks. And tokenomics seeks to understand how tokens function with these systems, or maybe I say ecosystems, including utility value governance and the impact on various stakeholders. So long story short, Ethereum allowed us to create virtual economies, which now we can create on many different layer ones and twos. And essentially, tokenomics tries to understand what are the principles governing those economies. And that's not just an academic study. The thing with tokenomics is that we really care about optimizing these economies in order to align incentives to achieve a particular purpose. So the first goal of tokenomics is always to allow the combination of incentives on a blockchain. Okay, so for me, this is key in tokenomics and in the crypto space, in the Web3 space. That is, token economies allow us to align different types of incentives in any way we wish to achieve a certain outcome. And this opens up countless possibilities, which allow us to build economies focused around different themes. And tokenomics has become very, very important for any project. So it can easily destroy a project if token economy is not set up in the right way, but it can also make a project fly if it is. There are various key elements. These are some of the key elements. I don't think that's an exhaustive list, but these are some of the most prominent features of tokenomics. Token distribution is obviously one, and for a long time, token distribution had been synonymous with tokenomics, but I don't think this is the case any longer. It's just one part of a very big picture. So token distribution obviously refers to how tokens are distributed across agents like investors, the public, and also how the tokens are being issued, which you understand the way it used to be ICOs, not so much anymore. Then the utility obviously is probably the most important factor other than the distribution. A token needs to have a certain utility within a system, otherwise it just can't. It usually won't go anywhere. That's not to say that we've not witnessed many examples of what we call Ponzinomics, for example, that is tokens with no inherent utility. They make up a nice story as to why they're useful, and then they just acquire value. Some people get money, then they crash. We witnessed a lot of that in NFTs in the metaverse space. It's one of the things that tokenomics auditing can really help with, which is the topic of this presentation, which we will cover in the second part of this workshop. Inflationary, deflationary dynamics, very, very big. That is a system issuing new tokens, which means this increases supply, which can then lower the price of the token, or do have deflationary dynamics. You probably heard that, oh, Bitcoin is deflationary and so on and so forth. What this means is that it has limited supply. So over time, this puts some additional pressure on the price. And however, there are certain ways to artificially impose certain restrictions on the price through scarcity burns, staking, things like that, which, again, these are some of the tools we have in our toolbox, and we're going to also discuss this later. Governance is also an important factor. In the last few years, we've seen more and more projects fall like within the category, within the description of a DAO, that is a decentralized autonomous organization. And obviously governance is at the core of this. So many projects use tokens for governance. And then finally, incentives and economic models. And it goes without saying that this is really at the heart of a token economy. Is the token actually incentivizing certain types of behavior, which then create a virtuous loop? Does it create economic value? Is it sustainable, or is it not? And these are some of the things we look in when we're doing audits as well. There are different types of tokens, and I mean, there are different types of categorizations, but I guess the most prominent categorization is this threefold categorization that breaks tokens down into three different types: utility tokens, security tokens, and governance tokens. So utility tokens are tokens that are used to access goods or services within an ecosystem, but they do not represent ownership of that ecosystem, okay? So the most basic example of a utility token is a token that is used to pay fees for some service, like you pay fees to access the Ethereum blockchain. Security tokens, on the other hand, they represent some kind of ownership, and security tokens can be significantly, I mean, they're a bit of a different beast, as a business model, they make perfect sense. However, there are certain issues around regulation and security tokens, which can cause many, many issues down the line. So in practice, many projects, they try to do anything within the power to make sure that their token is a utility token and not a security token. Then governance tokens. So governance tokens, as the name implies, they give the right of participation to a decentralized autonomous organization or to decisions within a protocol. And depending on how popular governance is, how the protocol is set up, how big the community is, some of those governance tokens sometimes can acquire very significant value. Quite often, you can have utility tokens coexist with governance tokens because there are certain tokenomics designs that allow both to exist at the same time. And there are obviously different factors that can affect the value and the price of a token. These are three of them. I'd say first and foremost, the most important one is supply and demand dynamics, which is common sense, really. Then utility is probably ideally the main factor behind demand. Not to say that in some cases, especially around bull runs, we might also see speculation being a very important demand factor, and also community. Okay, so usually the big projects, they have a combination of all of those factors together. They have lots of utility, there's lots of demand, there's a very strong community. So if you think of things about like a Bitcoin and Ethereum and big layer ones, or even layer twos like Polygon, you're going to see all these things being there. When you look into newer projects, they always try to figure out how to create each one of those things, like, oh, how can you create a community? How can we increase our utility? How can we make sure there's not as much supply and there's more demand than supply, things like that. And obviously tokenomics as a concept and tokens in general, I mean, they offer many benefits. And again, I guess it's a good idea to explain this, because tokenomics is not necessarily synonymous with crypto or blockchain. If anything, it came about, let's say, tokenomics became popular as a thing a few years after Bitcoin was launched. First of all, the technology was not there. So it's important to state that there are certain benefits in using tokens instead of just using, instead of just like avoiding them completely. And some of those benefits obviously include the fact that you can unlock latent demand. This is what I call, like certain projects, they allow the creation, let's say, of value or the exchange of value in ways that it wouldn't have been possible without tokenomics. So, for example, decentralized exchanges, they can operate 24/7. So they allow you to exchange, cryptos, or if you have synthetic assets, maybe even like stocks and shares, 24/7 without an intermediary, right? Which means that if there is demand for a certain part of the population that wants to trade crypto, let's say at midnight, when because whatever, then they can actually do this. So compare this against a real stock market where this is not possible, right? Stock markets, they work over a few hours every day. This is the only time where you can buy a stock. And I guess that's similar to some other business models in technology like Uber or Airbnb, where essentially all they're doing is they're unlocking latent demand. I have an asset, a house, and I want to use it somehow. You can just rent it out using Airbnb. Then alignment of incentives is also a very important factor, and this is really the core of any economy. And obviously, increased efficiency, improves transparency, and enhanced security. So all this goes back to also having a community with aligned incentives. So when these things take place, then you have added value, and there's more trust, and obviously the system is more difficult to crack, okay, to hack. So obviously tokenomics is a very challenging field as a whole, right? So it's a field that's quite complex, and it's not an easy topic to understand, especially for those new to cryptocurrency space. I've been working in this area since 2017, and I've helped many projects get the feet off the ground. And I can tell you, it's not that easy to figure out how to design the right token economy. And I think it's still a nascent field, so we're figuring things out as we go along in many cases. Obviously, tokens can be very volatile, especially for early stage projects, but even like mature projects, they can be quite volatile. So it can often be a bit tricky trying to figure out how to reduce this volatility and how much of a risk it imposes. And suddenly there's always the shadow of regulation. And that is, we don't know, for example, with ICOs, they were essentially killed off by regulation. And now there's this thing with projects trying to avoid being labeled securities and things like that. So this is like a very common ubiquitous risk in tokenomics that everyone's trying to address all the time. Okay, so that was like a short primer on tokenomics for those of you who are new to the subject. And now I'll move on to discuss tokenomics auditing, which tokenomics auditing, I believe, is it is one of the latest innovations in tokenomics design, and it's something I've been working on for the last 2 years. And I do believe in the next bull run, which might happen next year or the year after that, who knows, we're going to see more and more projects actually wanting to be audited in order to demonstrate their quality. And the reason and the why behind economics auditing is going to be very easy to explain after we go through a couple of case studies. And obviously, the first case study that we ought to mention is that of the Terra Luna crash. So I'm sure that each and every one of you must have heard about Terra Luna and the crash that took place. I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it was last year. So Terra Luna was one of the biggest projects in the crypto space, and it was a decentralized algorithmic stablecoin. So there were two tokens in Terra Luna, one called Terra, which was the stablecoin US Terra, and then Luna, that was an auxiliary token that was helping stabilize the primary token. So for a long time, Terra Luna was operating just fine without any real problems. So the Luna price, as you can see on this chart, the orange one, was going up and up and up. And then Terra was stable, which is a stable coin. So you expect it to be around $1, as you can see on this chart. However, at some point, the peg of the US Terra, it broke down. It went a little bit below $1, and then it completely crashed and everything went all to zero. $45 billion were lost, and there were many, many issues as to why this happened. But some of the issues that definitely played a role was that, first of all, there were no proper mechanisms to induce stability. The system had never been audited, and it was also being presented by the founder as a flawless system that would dominate the crypto space. And finally, the treasury of the project was completely mismanaged. They had the opportunity to save the project a few times, but they never really did that. Okay. So apparently this was a project that played a very, very important role in the crypto space. We're talking about an immense amount of value there, and no one ever really bothered to check whether things are right and whether it's going to work, whether it has been stress tested or anything like this. And Doc Von, the CEO of Terra Luna, was like, yeah, that's the ultimate token, the ultimate project, the ultimate stablecoin. It's going to dominate everything, and then it just crashed, and many people lost a significant amount of value. And then another very famous scandal is obviously the one by FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. $1 trillion loss, again, like immense financial loss. It's like horrible. Many lives were destroyed, and there were many dodgy things happening, especially on the accounting side. But on the tokenomics side, something that was very prominent and very dodgy, let's say, was the fact that FTX was issuing its own tokens and then placing them as collateral, which is pure insanity. But again, no one really said anything about this. No one knew anything about this. No one had audited any of these processes. They all just took for granted that, yeah, it's a very big project. It can fail. It's a very serious exchange. Yada. So again, you can see how the lack of oversight can create monsters, which even if they seem too big to fail, actually they can fail, and they can fail with a bang. Yeah. On another note, one of my favorite examples in tokenomics auditing it was a smaller and less well-known project called Diamond Up. So. And this is now has been transformed into a new ecosystem called DISO. But back then, I think it was 2021, if I'm not mistaken, there was this Twitter clone called BitCloud. A very nice idea. It was functioning quite well, nice community. And also they had a very nice vision. Essentially, what they wanted to do is they wanted to give power back to creators. So they said, look, you can. The way this works is that you create an account and then you have a creator coin, okay? And then the more people buy the coin, the more value the coin gets. And they use the bonding curve mechanism to do this. So a bonding curve is essentially a function which can determine the price of a token based on factors such as, in this particular case, how many people have bought it. So the way this mechanism was designed, it incentivized what we call rug pulls. So essentially, a creator was incentivized to popularize their work, and once they became popular, then they were incentivized to just sell everything and then take the profit from themselves. So even if the platform had a nice community, it was working very well, it had this endemic problem of rug pulls. So one rug pull after another, and then eventually what happened is that there were so many rug pulls that just users just lost trust. So essentially this project went defunct, and then now it has relaunched under a different brand and a bigger vision as part of something called DSO, like the decentralized social blockchain. It's a bit sad story because it's not like the founders of this project they had any kind of financial gain like Sam Bankman-Fried or the Terra Luna CEO Doc Von. It was just a bad design that killed what was otherwise a very, very good idea. And again, if they had been through some kind of audit, it would have been possible to tell them, yeah, look, there's actually this very important weakness in what you guys are doing, and you should fix this now than later. Another good example of failed tokenomics is Axie Infinity. This is a game in the metaverse and Web3 space that was very, very popular during the metaverse hype. It was a year and a half ago. And Axie Infinity is a game, and you have two different tokens, a governance token and like a regular token. And you can use this token essentially to buy items and stuff. And the main problem that the token economy had was that you could get rewarded to play the game and take certain actions, but this made the token very inflationary. And this worked well during a bull run. So there were more and more players flooding into the game and more money flooding into this token. But once the market stopped going up, then this project ended up with very high inflation, with an oversupply of tokens, but not enough demand to sustain the price. And essentially, they didn't have any sinks, as I say on this slide, any economic sinks to make sure that, okay, you're producing this token, but then it's not just increasing the circulating supply for no reason at all. And then eventually, this had a very big impact on the price. Then the Axie Infinity team, they tried to use their treasury to defend the price. And obviously now this project is not as popular as it once was, but we're in a bear market anyway. And that's like another very good case study of why you need to be careful with tokenomics even before you launch your project. So I believe the solution to many of those problems and many of those case studies that I just presented to you is tokenomics auditing. And the objective of tokenomics auditing is to provide an assessment of a token economy and to explain whether a token economy can achieve its goals, whether there are any weaknesses, and what users and investors need to be aware of. And it doesn't come down to saying, that tokenomics is perfect. It doesn't come down to saying that there are no weaknesses, that, the project is going to go 1,000x or anything like this. But it comes down to identifying weaknesses, making a project more robust, and helping users and investors make a better informed decision, which is this is what the users of Terra Luna, this is what the investors of FTX didn't have. They were essentially misguided. And even if they weren't necessarily misguided in the sense that, being the victims of fraud, even though that's debatable, they were still misguided. As in, for example, I think when Doc Von was saying that Terra Luna is flawless, he really believed what he was saying, because that project, no one had ever really audited it. And so here are the pillars of tokenomics auditing, which I have put together through my research in a checklist that anyone can use. It's publicly available. It's published on the Journal of the British Blockchain Association, and anyone can use that in order to go through this list and identify whether their project fulfills the criteria it needs in order to be considered a robust and safe project. So we start with the business token interaction, then we have allocation and distribution, then structural analysis, and finally stability and stress tests. So first of all, business token interaction. This is an example. This is a very interesting graph which shows the price of Olympus DAO. Okay, so Olympus DAO is a very famous example in what we call Ponzinomics, which is when a project doesn't really have a very good business model, but it creates value simply through financial hacks. And this is what happened with Olympus DAO. So they had a business model that it would acquire value as users would invest money in it, but didn't really have a way to preserve this value. So, and what happened is it went up and then eventually it crashed, as you can see on this graph. And this is one of the most important questions for any tokenomics project. Do tokens improve the current business model, or they do not? And then this leads to the second question. Is the token a nice to have or an essential part of the business model? And then the third point, can the project gain value, not just the token, but the project itself, like the economy itself, in fiat terms? If the answer is yes to all of these three questions, then your project is in a good place. If the answer is no to any of those questions, then maybe you have to re-examine some of the fundamentals and maybe even the whole design or the business model of your project. Then we move on to the structural analysis, as we call it. That is an analysis of the structure and the dynamics of a token economy. But the structural analysis of any project is by far the most difficult and demanding part, with the exception of simulations, which can take a lot of coding work. So in structural analysis, we go through each one of those points. We start off with the cash flows. That is money coming in and money coming out. A token economy is a lot like a real economy. That is, we want to see that the inflows are more than the outflows. Then the mechanisms of all the economic agents involved. And at this part, we might even do game theoretic analysis to understand how the incentives align with each other. Then the demand drivers. Okay, so is there anything that is driving demand? And if some factors drive demand for a token, can the project affect those factors? So can it increase demand if it wants to do so? Then governance, and then empirical proof. Okay, so governance, okay, this refers to analysis of the governance mechanisms, if such a thing exists for a project, maybe there's not. And then empirical proof refers to the existence of data from similar or related projects or projects that use similar mechanisms. And then this empirical proof would indicate that maybe these mechanisms, if they work in some other place, then they can also work for this particular project. So stability and stress tests. Okay, so this is the next sector, the next section of an audit. How exposed to shocks is the token? So as we saw in some of the earlier cases, some tokens like Terra Luna were very exposed to shocks. Okay, so this is where running a simulation can help a lot with understanding how robust the token is. And does the token appreciate when simulated? If the objective of a token is to provide a peg or some other functionality, this question can often be ignored. But in most cases, most tokens that don't want to be stable coins, they want to appreciate in value. So you should at least make sure that they can preserve this value. And finally, does the system have feedback loops which could accelerate a crash? A good example being the Terra Luna case that suffered from this type of feedback loop. So I've put everything together into a simulation library in Python that is also using some research that we've done with the UCL Blockchain Center in order to generate the evaluation models. That is, what is the fair value for a token given certain assumptions. And we also can simulate different scenarios and perform a stress test. I'm going to show you an example of how this works in a bit. And one of the aspirations behind this framework for tokenomics auditing is to create a very simplified way to understand what's the value of a project. And we're doing this through a letter scoring. Essentially, we're trying to imitate what Moody's is doing with banks and bonds and corporate bonds and all of this kinds of stuff. So this is a letter scale that has been inspired by Moody's. And then depending on the score, that you get a score based on the analysis and based on the checklist, which I'm going to show you in a second. And then based off of that, then we can get a letter score. And again, it doesn't mean that every project has to go for AAA. I don't think that's the case. However, I do think that most projects should aspire to at least get a B, okay? There are obviously certain projects which, by their nature, they can be quite risky, which means that an A score, maybe it's not possible, and that's fine for certain types of projects. So if you're dealing with, I don't know, DeFi and crypto derivatives, you're never going to be a very safe project, and that's absolutely fine, okay? So, and here's an example of an audit of Terra Luna. There are many questions in that checklist, which I just described, and we're going to go through it in a second. On this particular slide, you see answers to certain questions which would influence the scoring of Terra Luna. So to make things a bit clearer, in the paper, which I'm going to share with you, we go through a fictional audit of how could have someone audited Terra Luna if they had this checklist back then before Terra Luna crashed, okay? And they had the information they had back then. That is, they didn't, because now we know that Terra Luna crashed, so it's easy to look, at it, and in hindsight say, yeah, of course it crashed because yada yada yada. So we ran this, let's say, exercise and said, okay, so if someone wanted to run an audit back then, it didn't possess perfect information around the project, the only thing they had access to was this checklist and what is publicly available. How could they go about giving Terra Luna a score? And through these questions, let me spell them out for you. I mean, we started with the fact that Terra Luna, it requires a critical mass in order to be able to provide value, so that's a negative. Demand is not fully controlled by the protocol. This was actually their downfall. It could be, you could say that rewards are largely speculative. To Terra Luna's case, they were actually trying to improve rewards and make them less speculative, but eventually this wasn't enough. Their efforts were not enough. Rewards in underlying value. The demand drivers depended on entities that generate real economic value or speculative factors. It was more speculative factors, and finally, there were some Ponzi-like elements which actually they became better known after the crash, even though many users were aware of them before the crash took place. So each one of those points is like a question that has to be answered through the checklist, and it eventually gives a negative, it provides some negative points to the overall audit. And this gives it a score of double B. So what double B means, it can be interpreted as to that the tokenomics are good, but far from perfect. This rating corresponds with what was observed in practice. So what was observed in practice is that the project managed to grow. It had some very good bits and pieces. It was a decent project. It managed to maintain the peg in a very stable manner for quite a while until it didn't, okay? So this is what double B means. It means that, yes, it works, but it's not perfect. And this goes back to the principles of tokenomics auditing. That is, the principles are to help the users and investors make an informed decision, but this doesn't mean that because Terra Luna eventually crashed, it would have to crash, right? Maybe they could have taken some measures, made some interventions, and then it wouldn't crash. So double B means that it's a decent project with some weaknesses, so be a little bit careful, okay? So that's about Terra Luna. And what does the future of tokenomics auditing look like? So my personal belief is that in 5 to 10 years, tokenomics auditing might be a legal requirement for many, many projects. That is, pretty much like we see accounts now being audited, I believe we'll see tokenomics being audited. And the thing is, in the next 1 to 2 years, even if it's not a legal requirement, I believe that projects will want to do it themselves because they will see everyone else doing the same thing, okay? I believe that this is only the beginning of tokenomics auditing, and it can really help make Web3 and the crypto space a better and safer place to be. So this is the questionnaire. You can find the full version of it in the article published by the Journal of the British Blockchain Association. But I'll quickly go through it because we have a little bit of time left in this presentation. But what you see here, you see the different categories which I outlined earlier. That is the business token interaction, structural analysis, which falls into a few different subcategories, cash flows, mechanisms of all economic agents involved, demand drivers, allocation distribution, stability, and stress tests. And then within each one of those categories, we have to try and answer each one of those questions. The one that I'm using Token Lab for, the Python library I mentioned earlier, is essentially stability and stress test. So it's very difficult to answer this one unless you run some simulations. And this is something I really specialize in. And this is why I also had to create my own library in Python in order to make this a reality. And what you see here is, I think, yeah, if I'm not mistaken, no, it's not an answered questionnaire. I can show you the one from Terra Luna if you want later. But what you see here, you see this yes and no, and there are some numbers next to these yes and no's. So essentially what this means is they give or subtract points from different from each one of those, let's say from the overall score, and then it allows you to place a project on this table. So you can say that's, I don't know, a D or a triple A or a double B or whatever it might be. So that's essentially the intention behind this score. Now, obviously, don't take this as the ultimate tool, right? So you still have to do your own due diligence and you still have to be a bit pragmatic about it. I think that probably that's a bit too difficult for the average user to use, but I think if you're a founder in this space, you're going to benefit a lot by going through these questions and actually reflecting upon them and trying to understand what they mean and whether they, whether you're actually doing something wrong in your design and how to improve it. So if you want to know more, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm also more than happy to share the paper with you, which is actually publicly available. I'm not sure I can share this in the chat. Oh, actually, I think I can. Let me share a link to the paper now. Sorry, give me a second. Oops. Sorry, apologies. Because I think it can make for a very good read for anyone who's interested in this space. So essentially, my current research, for those of you who are interested in to know more about what we're working on, is automating tokenomics auditing, okay, through this type of library and through simulations and combining also LLMs into the mix. So if I can share another window for a second, what I'm currently working on, I actually shared more about this on LinkedIn today. Sorry, give me. So here, so you can see I've integrated my library with ChatGPT, so you can say things like, hey, can you please show me a demo simulation? Get the thing I need to add it. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, I'm also sharing my details. So you see how using ChatGPT and Token Lab, we will be able to create simulations very, very fast. I think in the near future, once we see like new versions of ChatGPT and more LLMs, and also Token Lab itself is improving, and we're adding more and more research into it, we will be able to roll this out very, very fast. And ideally, in the near future, we'd like to be able to audit tokenomics in an automated fashion. And this is really where we currently stand in the space of tokenomics auditing. And then you get some graphs like, okay, let me share my screen again. And then you get some things like this one. That's simulation I ran earlier. So that's like a demo simulation. Here you just see the price dropping, and then it stays stable around a certain value. The shaded areas are confidence intervals, demonstrating what's like a plausible range for the value, for a fair value of a token. And ideally, what you want to see is that you want to see things are not going to zero and they're stable or increasing. So obviously, there's quite a few things there, and I think we only have about 5 minutes left in this presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now stop sharing and open up to the audience for questions. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Stylianos. I think we'll ask the audience to paste their questions in the chat.
Hey, wait. Okay, so I think I lost you for a second. You're there now.
Yeah, first up a bit. Yeah, let's see. So is there any kind of ready-made tools out there that you can actually run audit if you see some kind of tokens out there, or do they have to kind of run deep down and do analysis by themselves?
Yeah, there are no tools for auditing. There's a graphical user tool, GUI tool called Machinations, but the reason I created Token Lab is because I was finding it very restrictive. it's still early days in this space. So I'm afraid no tools out there. Like when I provide this service to clients, it's a combination of consulting and coding and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. That's a bit sad. It's not accessible to everyone. Someone has pasted a question in the chat. Jazim asked, can you use this framework for auditing NFTs?
Not exactly. I mean, the problem with NFTs is that quite often they can be speculative, right? So if the NFTs, they're part of a token economy and they create some real economic value, then yes, you can. But NFTs, as we saw them, like in the last bull run, they really have no inherent value. They can only be valued by the same principles that you can value art, which is very subjective and esoteric.
Okay. And I think we've got someone else in the audience that has a question. I'll allow Rachel to speak maybe and answer and ask a question.
Yeah, it is.
He said, is it, well, they said, is that possible to use machine learning to do risk or fraud prediction in tokenomics?
Yeah, I mean it is, but it depends on how you mean it, right? So if you're talking about using a machine learning model on a protocol to detect fraud, then you absolutely can. This is what banks are doing in traditional finance. If you're talking about auditing, like I showed you, we incorporate some machine learning in Token Lab. So yes, you can use that as well. I mean, obviously, I'm a machine learning expert. That's my bread and butter. So I'm very eager to use machine learning in any opportunity I get.
Okay, sounds good. Uh, we'll see if there are more questions coming from the audience.
I don't see any questions.
Uh, answered. Yes. Okay. So and then and he did mention that this address this question regarding the framework for auditing NFTs but earlier. But how widely is this framework can be applied? I mean, can it be used to assess to audit other types of all types of tokens or
Yeah,
products?
yeah, yeah. There's a bit of bias towards DeFi because DeFi was one of the riskiest, let's say, types of um, things we have seen in the Web3 space. But yeah, you can use it for pretty much anything, any kind of token, really.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
What are the next steps? There's a question by an anonymous attendee. What are the next steps to standardize the framework and make it available to wider public? That's what I'm working on. It's one of the reasons I'm doing these presentations. It really comes down to more and more projects using it and people sharing it in between themselves and then coming up with a version 2, a version 3, a version 4, and saying, yeah, that's like a standard in the field. That's that's what everyone should follow.
Okay. It's very interesting actually. If that's going to combine very well with the DeFi world, because when I was checking with chatting with other people around whether DeFi has to come into the educational materials and content, people were not sure about it, right? Do you think that would make a good material if we combined auditing mechanism together with the DeFi and coins that make a kind of complete set of educational materials for people to both make investment decisions but also be able to be educated more in this area?
Yeah, I think education is key to avoid things like Terra Luna happening again, and people falling victim to, to the wrong types of ideas and and hype.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Uh, let's see if there is any more questions from the audience.
I think we're all clear.
Okay. If that's the case, allow me to thank you very much, Stelianos, for
Perfect.
a perfect presentation. Actually, I think I really enjoyed it, and uh, the reason why we didn't enjoy kind of introduced the speakers too much at the front is that it will be an integral part of a video. So when we cut off and in kind of clips for you and for Elaine, it'll be separate complete videos for yourself
Okay.
to do the presentations, so that they'll come to yourself very well.
Okay.
I don't know if Elaine is there as well, ready
We'll
for
stop recording my part now, if you don't mind. So I'll stop now. So if you want to start recording Elaine's part,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. We can do that. Right. Thank you again.